Hi, welcome to my video, and this is Introduction to HTML, and this will be a brief overview of the purpose of HTML. Not necessarily an in-depth look at all the features, but a basic rundown. So thanks for joining me, and let's get started. So first things first, what is HTML? Well, HTML stands for Hypertext Markup Language. And basically, it is a language that defines the structure of a site. It is a piece of code that gets interpreted by a web browser and basically describes the structure and content of the site. There's not much to it. It's not necessarily considered its own programming language. It is just simply a markup language that the web browser interprets. So the current iteration of HTML, the latest is HTML5, which isn't that significant to anything we're discussing, but it's just the current iteration. It's good to know. So let's get started. First, you're going to want to open a text editor, which is what I have open right over here. It's a piece of software that allows you to write and edit text, and it's specifically used for coding and programming. Right now I'm using Sublime Text 2, which you can download for free. Or you can also find Notepad++ or Atom, which are some other popular text editors. You can even use just a regular Notepad if you're using a Windows computer, or even you can use Microsoft Word. You can even save HTML documents. But it's a good idea if you're wanting to continue learning web development that you download your own text editor. It'll make things easier in the long run. A lot of text editors have customizable features and plugins that really allow you to be more efficient when you're programming. So first things first, let's save this as an HTML document. So I opened up a new project, and now I'm going to save it. I'll just save it to my desktop. You can save it anywhere you want, just make sure you can locate it. And we'll call it tutorial.html. And if you don't know, the .html designates it as a file type, HTML. You can also do that by just going through here and clicking on HTML, but it's quicker just to write .html at the end of your file name. So press save, and if you go to your desktop, you'll actually see there's our file right there. And if we click it and open it, it'll open in a web browser. I use Google Chrome, so that's why the image is Google Chrome, but it could differ depending on what your default browser is. But basically you'll see Chrome opened up our HTML file, and there's nothing there, which makes sense because we haven't written anything yet. So let's start writing some code. First thing that you're going to write at the top of your HTML file is this right here, doctype HTML. Now this basically tells the browser what document type. I mean, it's pretty self-explanatory, but it tells the browser that this is a document that is an HTML file, so it knows how to read the rest of the information. Now the way HTML works is it basically uses these things called tags, which will describe different elements on our web page. And the general format for these tags, ignoring what we wrote up here, which is an exception to the general rule, is that you'll have these angle brackets, and you'll have the tag name. I'll just use tag for now for the sake of it. Closing bracket, and then you'll have another one that has a backslash in front of it. Basically, this just describes your element. And so that's just the general format. Let's write some real HTML tags so we can get a feel for what's going on here. And basically every HTML document is broken into two parts, a head and a body. So we'll write the head, there's the head, and the body. Now you'll see within the head there's an element called title, which is actually what you see if you ever go to a web browser and see how up here it says tutorial.html. That's just a default title, but we can also change that to anything we want. And that's how websites, if you ever visit one, you see like their logo and the description on their tab. This is where that happens. So we'll do title, and we'll say my first site. And then we'll make sure you close the tag. And there's that. So we'll save that, and we will go to our browser and refresh the document. And there it is. It popped up right in our tab, my first site. So there's that. And within the head tag, you'll usually contain links to other files that'll help style your site or add interaction, but that's outside the scope of this tutorial. We're just talking basic HTML. So that's all you need to include in the head. So we'll move on to the body. And this is where all your content lies. This is the most important part of the HTML document. Well, content-wise, I guess you could say. All of it's pretty important, really. If you want it to work, you need all the components. But inside the body tag is where you're going to place everything. So we will start with the heading tag, which is abbreviated by H followed by number. So we'll use H1, which is the biggest heading. And we'll just call it heading 1. Basically, the way heading works is you can add a number after the H. You usually only see people use up to 4 or 5, but the higher number you go, the smaller the size. So we'll just put 2 more. We'll put H2, heading 2, H3, heading 3. I don't know why I put those spaces in front of that, but it doesn't really matter. But here we go. We'll load that up. And there you go. There you see the heading 1 is the largest, 2 is a little bit smaller, 3 is smaller, and that trend will continue. And another thing I want to mention that I just thought of, I probably should have mentioned earlier, is that spaces within your HTML text, as long as it's not part of this content over here, it won't affect anything. And that is because HTML, when it gets interpreted to code, there is no spacing. It just interprets it, really. So you don't have to worry about like having your body all the way down there, moving it around. It'll all be interpreted the same way. It's not really important, but it is usually good practice to space them out nicely. You see how I indented the elements that are within body, and if I had an element within the header, I would also indent that as well. But so there's heading. There's also the P element, which is another predefined element, and that stands for paragraph, and that's where you'll write most of your content. Just write a bunch of random stuff, yada yada yada, and then save it, open up, and there you go. And that's just the default style for the P element, and you can always change that later on using something called cascading style sheets, which is using CSS, and you can also take advantage of implementing JavaScript into your site, but those are out of the scope of this tutorial, and right now we'll just use the basic default styles that HTML defines. So followed by the P element, there's also another important one called A, which is used for hyperlinks, and the A tag is actually followed by something called an attribute, which in this case is href. So after that A, we'll put href, which stands for hyperlink reference, which will point to the URL that we want our link to go to. So for the sake of this tutorial, we'll just do something simple like Google. And I'll click here. And now that will be a link. It'll be click here, and I'll click it, and it should bring us to Google. So let's see if it works. We'll load up our site again, refresh it. Oh, there we go. Yep, works. Take us right to Google. So that's fun. It's another important thing. And basically attributes, those will be specific to the element, and you can just, when you encounter different tags, you'll figure out how to use the attributes for each element. And sometimes, I mean, I won't go too in depth into those right now, but they are important, and just take note of that. And the last tag we'll talk about is the image tag, which is just abbreviated IMG. And similar to the href, this has an attribute called src. So we'll do src, and then within quotations, we will put the location of our image. Now that can be a locally stored image, or it could be a URL. In this case, we'll use a URL. And I'll just load up this picture, copy image URL. I found that in Google Images. You can use any image you want, really. Just paste the image URL there, and then close the image tag. Now, the thing about the image tag is that unlike the other ones, it doesn't have an opening and an ending tag. It just ends on its own. It doesn't follow that traditional opening tag, content, end tag. And there are a few tags within HTML that do that. This is one of the important ones. But again, you'll encounter those as you go by, and there's really no difference. You just don't have to add an image after it, the closing brackets after it. Makes things a little quicker. And so let's see how that works. After that, I'll just write a little description too, just to add things up. Like, this is my new bike. Cool, awesome. So now if I save my file, and I reload my site, boom, there we go. Now that image that was on the web, on the internet, through that URL is now connected to our site. So when our browser interpreted our code, it found that image and brought it up within the structure of our other content. And there's our little description. This is my new bike. So that's a basic rundown of HTML. I think we covered a good deal for just an introductory lesson. Now there's definitely a lot more to learn, and you'll definitely see how to make a website more professional looking. Right now we have something that is not very impressive, but once we add some styling, some functionality through CSS and JavaScript, in addition to some other technologies, you can really make a professional looking website with not a lot of experience. And it's a very fun, very rewarding thing to do. So thanks for joining me, and I hope to see you guys again soon.